Pronab Sen, Country Director at the International Growth Center. Thank you very much for making the time to be on NDTV. I've been closely following your writing, and I'm going to stick to one which focuses on the impact of the demonetization move on India's informal sector. So my first question is a basic one. What is the importance and what is the extent of cash in India's informal sector? If you can share some data points that set the stage for our conversation.
Well, the informal sector in India, whether it is agriculture or informal manufacturing and services, the formal credit is very, very small. So all told, almost all transactions in these sectors, over 90%, is in cash.
Okay, and just in terms of a GDP share and an employment share, what are we talking about when we refer to the informal sector, both in agriculture and manufacturing?
Well, the GDP share is somewhere between 45 and 50%. It's not an exact estimate. And employment is nearly 85%.
Those are very sizable numbers. So now comes the question, demonetization.
They are indeed.
And the impact it will have on this sector. How do you see it playing out?
Pretty badly, actually. One of the unfortunate things is that the entire process of monetization is being carried through the commercial banking sector, which means that it's only that little component of the informal sector which does have a credit line from a commercial bank, which will be able to get some money. The rest will be withdrawing money or exchanging money at the rates that have been prescribed by the government, which is all right for their consumption needs, but is certainly not all right for their production requirements.
And what does that mean? Does that, in a sense, are you implying that economic activity in the informal sector, therefore, is absolutely paralyzed or likely to be soon?
Well, maybe not. Let's take what I think is the most pressing case, which is the agriculture sector, with the Rabi sowing coming up. The farmers need large amounts of cash at this time to purchase inputs. If they don't get it, then we may well see the Rabi sowing being much less than normal, even though we've had normal rainfalls. And this will have then a knock-on effect on the economy, both through rural incomes as well as through the reduction in the supply of agricultural commodities.
Earlier today, we had the government coming out with a set of measures aimed at easing the cash crunch in the agricultural sector. So the farmers have now been allowed to withdraw 25,000 rupees in cash per week. But of course, the rider is that this is against money that was in the account, whether loan money or otherwise. Also, traders in APMC markets have been allowed to withdraw up to 50,000 rupees a week. And during his briefing earlier today, in fact, a fairly short while ago, Shaktikanta Das, Secretary of Economic Affairs, said this is to ease any choke-up in the crop procurement process. Does this seem like the kind of balm that was needed?
Well, Malvi, let me put it this way. If you take an average farmer, particularly in the north and the west, who has about 1 hectare of land, the financial requirement for buying his crop is roughly 6 lakh rupees for a single farmer. So if the trader is being allowed only 50,000 a month, this doesn't even suffice for a single farmer.
Those are certainly somber numbers. You know, for a moment, if you had to consider in academic terms the positives from demonetization, and perhaps in these times where we're not able to, understand the impact on the negative side, and there's this assurance again and again that, the medium to long-term gains will be substantial. Focus and reflect a little bit on the potential positives.
Well, as far as the long-term gains are concerned, it depends on the perspective you're taking. If you're talking about the economy as a whole and you're looking at long-term gains which may be arising from the corporate sector, that's one way of looking at it. But if you're concerned about equity, if you're concerned about the poor, then one of the long-term effects I can see is if the Rabi sowing is affected, is distress sale of land. And that's a permanent effect. Right? Now, as far as palliatives are concerned, I think the government needs to realize that whereas consumption can be done through periodic small amounts being injected on a weekly basis, production activities require large sums of money up front. So all of these limits like 25,000 or 50,000 really don't mean very much, frankly.
What will you be looking for in the weeks and months ahead that signal growing distress in the informal sector? As we map this process, and India is such a vast country that, we've talked in the past about, data points, the sanctity of data points to sort of draw a clear big picture. But what will you be tracking as signals of distress in weeks and months ahead?
Two things. The Kharif crop will be harvested and sold towards the end of this month, which is the end of November. And we will know what the mandi transactions are. And that will give you a fairly good idea as to what's happening. All right? You'll know both the quantities and the price. And the second thing which you will get to know in late December or early January is going to be the acreage sown for the Rabi. Both of these are very sensitive indicators of what's likely to play out in the future.
I know my questions sound a little simplistic, but is there any intervention at this stage that comes to your mind that would, in a sense, address the issues that the informal sector is likely to face? I mean, we've already talked about the limited gains from what the government announced today. But say the job was on your desk and, you had to design an intervention to really ease the issue for the informal sector. What could that intervention be? I'm not using the word rollback for a reason because it always carries political overtones. But what could the intervention be?
It does indeed. The intervention, I think, is quite straightforward, which is that since there is a certain amount of flexibility on the consumption side, I would not keep increasing the limits of withdrawal for consumption, and I would direct the entire additional cash being printed towards the credit generating sector with much larger limits than have been specified at the moment.
Redirection, that in itself could be a challenge, an effective redirection, and redirection whereby it reaches, the last mile in a sense. All of those, from what reports we've been gathering, seems to be a bit of a challenge. So will redirection, in a sense, do the job, is what I'm asking.
It won't do the job completely, but at least it will make the situation a little better than it is now. Because if things continue the way we are going, I think we are looking at fairly substantial costs.
It's early to talk about a GDP hit, but one investor conference had a brokerage firm putting out an estimate of a 1% hit negative hit to GDP growth just over Q3 and Q4. Does that seem reasonable or too early to call?
No, I think that's reasonable, but that has been done. I did exactly the same calculation, came up with roughly the same figure. That's a very reasonable assessment, but it's probably on the lower side because the knock-on consequences of a production disruption can in fact be much larger.
Okay, and careful that you are always looking at numbers to make a thesis. I'm not going to ask you what the other end of the band could be in terms of a negative hit to GDP growth. Pronab Sen, appreciate your time, really do, here on NDTV.
Thank you.